Okay, so I hope everyone can see in my screen. Okay, let's continue where we left from the topic of authentication. Quite a few people joining in. Uh, Ruchika. Okay, so perfect. Thank you. Yeah. So let's come back to the topic of authentication. So authentication is a process of verifying the identity of a person, service, or device. Please remember, when we talk about authentication, it's not just limited to a person. It is person, service, or device, where the person, service, or device is providing some credential. This does not necessarily have to be a username and a password. It could be a token. It could be some other form of authentication as well. Now, when we talk about authentication, we are concerned about a few topics. That is single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, passwordless authentication. So these are, and standard passwords, obviously. So standard passwords, as we understand, is just storing a password. Single sign-on is having one sign-on. For example, one identity provider such as Microsoft, sign in with Microsoft account, and then that is used across multiple applications that you access. Multi-factor is using more than one factor. For example, what you know is your password. What you have is, maybe your device where you get an OTP or something of that sort, and what you possess, so it is actually dependent upon multiple factors. So what you have, what you know, what you do, who you are. So who you are will be biometrics. What you do is the behavior of your pattern, for example, your behavioral biometrics. So depending upon that, that's how we talk about MFA. Now, we were talking about this diagram, so I'll just take a quick pause over here to open the diagram and share it with all of you. Now, this is from an official Microsoft documentation. If one of you could confirm, can you see the diagram? I just want to be sure I've not shared the application and the entire screen. Okay, you cannot see it. Let me stop sharing and start sharing again so that the screen is visible. Okay, so you'll be able to see this diagram. In this diagram, we can see on the left hand of the x-axis, we have inconvenient. On the right, we have convenient. On the top, we have high security, and at the bottom, we have low security. So if we go for passwords, passwords are convenient to remember, but they are low security at the same time. So they're not totally, secure, because passwords can be reused. People can write them down, people can forget them, and then they can be guessed as well. Because obviously, if I say you need to remember a 64 character password, you might not be able to do that, right? But if I say you need to remember a smaller password, that is something which is totally possible. Whereas if we go on inconvenient and high security, we have password plus two-factor authentication, which is obviously inconvenient, but at the very same time, it is high security as well. So you need to know the password, and you need to have your device. You need to have, the cell phone reception if it's OTP. You need to have a physical key fob that is generating numbers, or you need to have your smartphone enabled with the, applications such as authenticator. So two-factor makes your life a little more difficult. Let me give you an example. Let me show you a real-world example of how an authenticator application looks like. Though this is covered further in the slide, so we'll talk about it more. But just to give you an idea, this is for one of my accounts. I'm not sure if you're able to see it. The Zoom might not, be able to focus on it. But as you can see, as you briefly might have seen, it's generating numbers. So now this account is tied up to one of my other accounts. To be precise, my AWS account, where I enter my username and password. But along with my username and password, I need to enter this code, which changes every minute. So, it's not a security issue. It's my own code, and I know, no one will be quick enough to get that in the second. And obviously, if it was a corporate account, I won't be showing that to you. But since it's my personal, I'll just go disable it and enable a new one, so the security can be regained. But just to give you guys an idea, the code that I showed you, the code changes every minute. My password and that code is required to access my account. So that is how inconvenient high security works. And now the latest form of authentication that we have, which we'll be talking about in the further slides, is passwordless authentication, which is very high secure. You do not need to remember something, and it is convenient as well because it's not having a lot of stuff to carry. Again, many of you might argue that two-factor is more secure and more convenient other than passwordless authentication, and it's not secure. But if you see, this is the official documentation of Microsoft. So as per Microsoft, for AZ-900, remember, passwords are low security and convenient. Password plus two-factor is high security but inconvenient. Passwordless is the most convenient high security mechanism. I know many might argue on this, but this is as per the official documentation. As you can see, this is a link from the Microsoft learn.microsoft.com itself. So you can refer to it if required. Does this make sense? Give me a thumbs up if it does. We'll talk more about passwordless authentication and two-factor in the coming slides, but is the grid clear to all of you? Awesome. Let's go forward. Let me come back to sharing my screen. So we've got less than 2 hours within which we would be covering all the content required for AZ-900. So if you feel that you're missing out or if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. But for certain questions, I might take them at the end so that we can finish the content within the time frame that we have. Now, many people will be joining in between. So if you've just recently joined in, or if anyone joins in later on, I'll not repeat the prior concept because we'll again be left short on time. Jatin, you can ask your question.
Yeah, so you mentioned passwordless authentication. I believe that's where you have an authenticator app installed, which generates the
Uh,
code.
no, passwordless authentication is not authenticator. Authenticator is a MFA device. So since it's just a 6-digit number, relying all your security on the authenticator app is not secure enough. You need to have passwordless communication. Passwordless authentication would be more of like you having a key fob that is storing your data, you using a USB disk, or you using a Bluetooth mechanism. We will talk more about it as we go further on that.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so to get started with, when we talk about single sign-on, it enables users to use one set of credentials to access multiple resources and applications from different providers. This means multiple applications such as Zoom give you the option to log in from Gmail or log in from Facebook or use your own SSO like your Concordia Zoom, right? You do not need to create an individual account on Zoom because they have a partnership with multiple other identity providers. Some common SSO providers will be sign in with Google, uh, sign in with Microsoft. Facebook also has an OAuth based application where you can either log in. There's another one that is popping up that is GitHub. So many websites allow you to log in via GitHub and you do not have to do the redundant process of creating a new account everywhere. So this is very easy because you need to have a complex password for your Gmail account, and that could be used at multiple locations. There is a downside to SSO. If one password is lost to your basic identity provider, you lose all the access together. So let's say if uh, if Jatin has an easy password for Gmail and Khalid is able to guess that, in that case, Khalid will have access to all Jatin's account wherever Jatin has used single sign-on. Does that make sense to all of you? So that's one con. And the pro is one password, you need to secure it. Securing it is your responsibility, and that could be used at multiple locations. Okay. So this reduces the need for users to remember multiple passwords and simplifies the security model. SSO requires trust between different application and providers and helps reduce the workload on help desk and IT when dealing with account lockouts and password reset. SSO also simplifies the process of managing access when user changes roles or leaves an organization. You disable their SSO and they're gone. That's it. So let me give you an example. For example, if I'm a current, I'm not a current, I am an alumni of Concordia. So let's say when I was an active student, I could just enter my net name and password that would take me to my Microsoft account. And using that, I could access all the services. Now, since I've graduated, what they do is they have enabled certain alumni services that I can access, but certain services like dprint, if you're from Concordia, and since this is a Concordia workshop, I'm giving examples in terms of Concordia. For anyone else, let's say if there's a specific service a particular organization only wants its members to access, they can just change the permissions. So for me, when I log in, I can do it via my SSO, single sign-on. But when I try to access certain services that are not there for alumni, I'm not able to access them. So that's how single sign-on works. It makes your life very easy so that you do not have to do a new username and password for everything that you have to use. Okay. Moving on, MFA or multi-factor authentication. This is where you use the concept of you're not just relying on one specific credential. You're not relying on what the user remembers. So for an example, multi-factor authentication will include what you know. It's the password that you know. What you have could be a device, for example, my mobile phone with an application running, which is generating some codes, or maybe a dedicated key fob, which has numbers. So let me show you how that looks like. I have one, but that's from my organization, and I cannot be showing that on, on this platform. But if I show you how a RSA token looks like, this is a kind of token, which is a physical MFA device. Now, I'm not sure if you've seen this in the past or not, but it has numbers that change every minute. So using this, if I need to log in into a specific service, I need to know the password that is set to my account. And in addition to the password, I also need to provide the number that is shown on the screen. If I do not enter this number, it will not allow me to go through it. And that's why it's called as multi-factor. So as I was talking about, this is the second factor. First factor is what I know. Second is what I have. Alternatively, there could be another one, who I am. That is, for example, my fingerprint, that'll be my biometric. It could be my iris scan. Obviously, it's not feasible to have an iris scan and a fingerprint at every location, but depending upon what the location is, how secure the facility is, multi-factor authentication could be used. Multiple laptops also come with MFA. So you need to, for example, if I'm using my Mac, and I need to sign out with Apple Pay. I do not want to, continue with the payment. Like, I do not want to enter my credit card. I want to use a default one that's there in my Apple Pay account. Certain websites that support Apple Pay have this concept where I need to put in my biometric. So that one authentication is I entered my password and I'm inside my laptop. Second is every time I want to make a payment, I need to touch my finger so that it is multi-factor. It is sure that I am the one who's trying to make the payment. And that is a very good example of a MFA device. Okay, so MFA, as I say, can be integrated in multiple ways. It could be, it is relying on more than one technique. So it's not, if you have two passwords, that is not MFA. So one password plus one OTP, one password plus one biometric, one password plus one behavior analysis or something of that sort is what is covered inside multi-factor authentication. Does this make sense to all of you? Okay, that was pretty straightforward, I guess. Next comes passwordless authentication, which we've been talking about, and which is again a very common topic for the exam because it includes certain links that we'll be talking about, which are Microsoft specific products. Okay, especially Windows Hello for Business is a Microsoft offering, so they love to talk a lot about that in the exam. So I'll just be taking you to these URLs briefly so that you could understand. But for details, you can be reading them out here. You do not need to know the details. You just need to know what they are for the purpose of the exam. So passwordless authentication methods eliminate the need for the password and instead use something you have, something you are, or something you know to authenticate. This makes it more convenient for users while still maintaining high security. Passwordless authentication methods need to be set up on a device before they can be used. Microsoft Azure offers 3 passwordless authentication options that integrate with Azure Active Directory. So you have Windows Hello for Business, you have Microsoft Authenticator app, and you have FIDO2 security keys. I know someone was talking about the Authenticator app. Let me answer that once again. So The authenticator app, though, could be used as a passwordless authentication, but would you ever want it to be the only form of authentication? No, not something, not a use case where I can think of. So if you go into a website, you enter the username and you're only adding the password from your authenticator app. No, that is very, very insecure, because if you are just relying your entire security on one application that could be accessed by anyone else who possesses your phone, you are taking the trust away from the customer. So from a real use case scenario, using only an authenticator app is not something which is actually preferred. This would be more rather for concepts like, which is using a system in a secured facility for which you need to enter your biometrics and then you're using the authenticator. So if it is like a second form of authentication in a real world scenario, this might be considered, but not for a production environment. Just a couple of keys from the authenticator. And then authenticator also has multiple options. So it's not just the 6 pins you get. You can be customizing that to the algorithm depending upon what you're storing in that application. And yes, those keys could be used as passwords. So depending upon the complexity, 6-digit numeric passwords are not enough because they could obviously be easily brute forced. But something longer, something alphanumeric is something which could be used in production. Not discussing that right now. We'll be coming towards the directory options we have. Before that, I see Jatin, your hand is raised. So you can ask your question.
Yeah, coming back to my question. So passwordless authentication was put under like convenient and secure. So
Yes.
when we are using something like an authenticator app, so we still need a device. So how is it like more convenient than having an
Okay.
OTP generated?
Okay. So for example, if you compare this to, let's say, MFA. In MFA, you need to know the password as well as you need to have the device. So convenience is, again, as I said, it is a very perspective term. What might be convenient for some might not be convenient for the others. As per the Azure documentation, again, I do not fully uh, agree or disagree with it, but yeah, that is one standard that they have given. And that is just a very generic thing that you need to remember. Now with MFA, because you need to authenticate in more than one ways. You need to have something, you need to know something, or you need to give your biometrics. That's why the complexity is high. Whereas in passwordless authentication, your reliance is only on one thing. You do not need to remember the other. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Again, as I said, this is up to debate. This is up to own understanding. But we will just be referring to what the documentation says to best be prepared for what might come in the exams. Moving forward, I'm just going to open these links. Okay, so these are the links to our slides itself. So we'll continue with this. I do have a couple of external links which I will be sharing at the end of it. When I was preparing my notes, I did end up preparing a couple of them. Uh, so to get started with, the first one is Windows Hello for Business. Now, Windows Hello, we might have all seen it at some point of time with the latest Windows machines, depending upon your type and make of your laptop. So if you turn on your laptop, Windows Hello will recognize your face and give you access, right? And I'm not talking about Windows Hello for Business. I'm just talking about the regular Windows Hello. So if in my machine, one of my machines has an iris scanner, where I turn on the laptop, the iris scanner or the face scanner, I'm not sure what that is. It blasts infrared on my face. It takes a scan. I'm not sure of exactly what minutia points or what things it is it considering. Maybe the distance of my eyes, of nose, maybe facial, maybe iris. Not sure about that. But recognizing recognize, because this is, again, your face is another form of biometrics, right? So recognizing my face, it gives me access into my machine and it'll be like, okay, you're good to go. Similarly, let's say if I have to make the payment, if I am using Apple, if I'm using Face ID, I am having one form of authentication. So as I said, Windows Hello is not something which is only on Azure, but Windows Hello is another trusted and very well used technology for multiple laptops which have advanced webcams to recognize the face, recognize the features of the face, and give user the access without needing the need to enter a password or a PIN to access the Windows machine. Now, when we talk about Hello for Business, it is different from Windows Hello, though it is based upon that. It has something to do with the facial recognition. So let's go further on that. So Windows Hello for Business is a passwordless authentication option that is ideal for information workers within their own Windows PC. It uses biometrics and PIN credentials that are directly tied to the user's PC, which ensures that only the owner has access. With public key infrastructure, uh, with PKI, with private key infrastructure integration and built-in support for single sign-on, it provides a convenient way to access corporate resources on-premise and in the cloud. So what happens is, for example, if you want to make your life kind of easy for the people who are consuming at the consumer end, again, depending upon the classification of the data that they deal with, you could be relying on facial recognition. Now that happens in my Windows machine as well. So when I turn it on, just by recognizing my face, because with time the technology has become so advanced that the chances of error are very, very low. So when it recognizes my face, the probability that it is, identifying the correct features and it's not having any false positives or false negatives, it's only having true positives and true negatives. That makes my life kind of easy to rely only on my facial recognition for logging in into my machine. So when you do that at a corporate level, where you want people to be authenticated, where you want to link, again, this is where Azure has an edge. So if your base machine is Windows, that's when you'll be able to use Windows Hello. If you are using a Mac machine, if you're using a Linux, the service is not compatible. Again, they do not mention it in the documentation, in the guide. There might be certain integrations around it, so I'm not commenting on that. But obviously a Windows product, which is more of like a Windows based service, if you're using that for authentication, that is obviously going to work best on a Windows machine when compared to others. Does that make sense? So it's basically using your face. And if, let's say, your face has changed, maybe, because you're wearing a mask or you're wearing a cap, you can alternatively use a PIN to authenticate into your machine or into the machine, using any other single sign-on service that has association with that machine. So for example, one major difference will be, let's say if I have this laptop with me, this laptop will have the permission to access a device, to access a website. It is not tied up to my account. The relation is that, let's say if I want a web page like my salary slip, which is Jivesh's salary slip, to be only visible to Jivesh. So in that case, if I'm using Hello for Business, it is my machine, it's my laptop. I'm okay, wait. Let me get that again. Okay, so this is me. I am authorized to access this payslip, but I cannot access this payslip directly. If I'm using Hello for Business, I need to be only logged in into my device, and then my device will be, let's say I'm calling this Jivesh's laptop, only this can be authenticated. So when we have this kind of architecture, we are relying that this laptop is always going to be under my possession. Because let's say if tomorrow, let's say Khalid is able to access my laptop due to any XYZ reason, then Khalid can, because the entity is not tied to me, the entity is tied to the laptop. So if Khalid is able to somehow gain access to my PIN, open my laptop, that laptop will be allowed to access the payslip. Does that make sense? Here it is more of like you are giving access, you're using SSO for the resource rather than SSO for the person. Does that make sense to all of you? So Hello for Business is you relying on the device that, yes, this device is going to be authenticated. The person will either enter the PIN or the person will show their face. That is what is going to be required for the person to get access to a website or any other resource. Okay. Now, coming on to the Microsoft Authenticator app, as I said, this is not enough in a production environment. Microsoft says it's a passwordless method, it is safe. I would personally argue, because again, now let me give you a use case. For example, if 4 or 5 friends go out on, let's say, a hike or on some excursion for a day, and they click pictures of each other, and then they're like, hey, I want to see the picture, how you clicked it. it's not super difficult to gain access to someone's phone, right? Casually by talking to someone, there's a very high probability they might just share their phone with you. And then if you quickly open the Authenticator app and then see it, it is actually going to be a security breach. However, there is an option with the Authenticator app to add your Face ID so that every time someone tries to open the application, they have to enter the Face ID. Otherwise, the application will not open. Let me quickly show this to you. This is an additional feature of security, but again, if someone has the access to my password, I will have no option, but my passwords will get lost. This autofocus feature of Zoom is making my life a little difficult. So sorry for that. But in simple words, you can see a Face ID prompt is open on my Authenticator app. Let me get it as close as I can. So the Google Authenticator app will only open if I show my face. Similarly, I could be using a Microsoft Authenticator as well, depending upon whatever I want to do. So Google has an offering, Microsoft has an offering. Both of them are essentially the same thing. They're compatible, or I'll say they're very similar to each other. You could be using either of them. So talking about the Microsoft Authenticator app, you have it on iOS, you have it on Android. It is strong. It uses your facial recognition to give you access to the app. Once you are into the app, you can get a notification, you can get a number, you can get a PIN that you need to enter, you need to confirm, and you can gain access. Honestly, from a practical use case, using only Authenticator for logging in is not enough. You need to pair it up with something like a password. Now, this is again something which is very prominently used in the industry. So please look at this. This is the FIDO2 security keys. This is an industry standard. So what happens is the FIDO2 standards promotes passwordless authentication by leveraging external security keys or platform keys built into devices. So FIDO2 security keys are unphishable. You cannot just, you cannot phish them. You cannot just gain access to them from someone else's machine. It's not so easy because they are designed for that very purpose. They come in various factors like USB. That's what I was talking about in the beginning, Bluetooth or NFC. So for example, if I need to gain access into one of my critical resources, again, I can't show a lot over here, but let's say if I have a key fob, I won't be able to show it here because again, it has some private information written on top and back. I thought it's plain on one side, can't show it. But let's say if I have a fob, I use that fob, I press that against the door, some information is communicated and I'm allowed to enter. A very good example of FIDO2 security will be, for example, you might have seen a lot of hotel keys being used which work wirelessly. So obviously they have some critical information that allows you to open the door, and there's some communication that happens between the lock and the key. So you could be using either Bluetooth or NFC or USB. This is a very secure form of authentication. Let me tell you why. Let's say, and this is again, a very practical use case. Let's say Jatin, Bowen, Khalid, Ruchika, Amandeep, and me, we all go on a vacation. The probability that I'm going to hand my key to someone else is very, very low because I know the key's single purpose is to gain access into my, room. But if someone asks me for my phone, I might be a little less careful because considering again that is a person to person thing. But considering, let's say if we click pictures, if we know each other for some time, I might be like, okay, take my phone, just have a look at your pictures, give it back. So since a phone is a multi-purpose device, relying only on one application means that someone might break the trust, they might gain access to something they should not. But for a dedicated device, that the device that whose sole job is just to authenticate people, you might not just give it away to anyone else. You might have some strict rules and regulations around what you do with that. Does that make sense to all of you? So if we are looking at passwordless authentication in the industry, the most prominent one that you might see is FIDO2 standards, where things are not just, uh, you can't just steal it away. If someone takes it from you, it's a one purpose thing. People know that you are using it for authentication. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up if it does. Okay. Yes, Jatin, go ahead.
You mentioned something called a fob. So is it necessarily like a physical device, like a USB or something with a Bluetooth?
Okay.
What's a fob basically?
A key fob. I can show you one from my apartment. I can't show you one from my office. So for example, this is like a card. This is required to enter the building. This is required to open my house as well. So since it's a it's a keyless place, all you need is this card, and you touch on the scanner, it authenticates you and it gives you the access. So if I put this card on any other apartment, it's not going to open up. If I put it on my apartment, it's going to open up. Similarly, there's a card that maybe the higher management has, so which has some higher level of like higher level of authority. If they put it, they can open any apartment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically, it's a physical entity that you use to access
Yes,
a premise
yes,
or a resource.
yes.
Okay.
So in a nutshell, if you're using passwordless login, using something physical is much more secure because you know it is for one purpose. Using something which is multi-purpose, the probability of people misusing it by stats is more than what a physical device might do for you. Okay. So moving on, Azure external identities. So Azure AD, wait, did I miss something? No. Okay, I think we're at a good spot. Azure external identities. So Azure AD external identities allows secure interaction with external users outside of an organization, including partners, distributors, suppliers, and customers. External users can bring their own identities, including Google or Facebook. This is external SSO that we're talking about, to sign in into Microsoft applications or other enterprise applications. Azure AD B2B enables collaboration across organizational boundaries and ensures appropriate access through access reviews. Azure AD B2C, that's business to consumer, is used for identity and access management for publishing modern SaaS or custom developed apps to customers and consumers. The capabilities of external identities include B2B collaboration, B2B direct connect, and Azure AD B2C. We do not need to know about the last line, that is just there, as it was a part of the documentation. But from an exam standpoint of view, what we need to know is Azure external identity is a feature in Azure that we could use so that we do not enforce everyone to have a Microsoft account. Please understand. When we talk about Azure, when we talk about Azure AD SSO, we are actually talking about Azure Active Directory using Microsoft single sign-on. But let's say if Bowen opens a company and the company is having their resources on Azure, but the consumers are not having a Microsoft account. For example, like generally, if let me have a quick survey. I know not everyone's active out here by the middle of a Sunday. That's absolutely fine. But how many of you have a Gmail account? Raise your hands. I'm quite sure almost anyone and everyone here today will be having a Gmail account, right? So I see about 16, 17, 20 of you interacting. The others, I'm not sure why they're not active, but yeah. How many of you have, and trust me now, I'm not talking about Concordia. How many of you have an Outlook account or a Microsoft account other than your corporate account? Other than your corporate account. You can see the maths, right? The difference is kind of there. I see approximately double the number of people having, you all can lower your hands. Thank you so much. If you have a question, I'm just going to come to that in a bit. You can see approximately when you run the stats, more people, due to many XYZ marketing reasons, are using Google on a regular basis. And I'm not sure why. Many are using Outlook as well. But if I go with the numbers, if I go with the trends, more people will be having, the probability of people having a Google account that sign in with Google is much more than the probability of people having sign in with, any other identity provider. So let's say if one of us opens a company and we want to run it on Azure, we do not want to force our users to work on Azure as well, right? Our users, our customers, our suppliers might be using Facebook login. That's a Facebook OAuth service. They might be using Google sign-on service. So using external identities, you can give people access to your Azure resources using the identities from other accounts. You do not want them to create an Azure account. Though you could do that, you could ask everyone to create an Azure account, and using identity and access management, you can give them granular access that, hey, you have this access, you have this access, you have that access. But you could be doing that is one possibility that you could do. But at the very same time, rather than doing that, you could also be like, hey, I know you're there, you could be using your Gmail account to get access to this. Does that make sense? So depending upon your partners, suppliers, customers, if they use some other login, you could be using that to give access to your resources on Azure. That happens via Azure external identities. From exam standpoint of view, if you hear the term Azure, if you see the term Azure external identities, just remember it is sign on via Google, sign on via Facebook, or sign on via any other you know identity provider. Now, moving on to Azure conditional access. So conditional access, now guys, one thing, since we have less time, we are on slide 116. Now there's a lot of content that I'll be going through at a faster pace. Now these slides are, very well designed. They're not copy pasted from the internet. There's a lot of time that has gone into building them. So they are comprehensive for the exam. For certain slides, I might be reading them, I might be explaining them just in the best interest of time. If anyone feels that they are getting lost at any point, raise your hand. I'll be more than happy to answer all your questions. Okay. But I might be slightly fast because in the morning, the topics that we were covering were the topics where we could draw. And those are the topics that have a very high weightage. So understanding them was very, very critical for the certification. But being a fundamental certification, Azure expects you to know about a lot of services, not in detail. So I know if our curiosity might trigger that, I want to know more about it. Why are we not dealing more about it? The thing is, if we start dealing, in detail of each and every service, even spending 3 times more amount of time will not be enough for covering everything, right? So it is exponentially high. The more time we spend on every service, the more complicated it gets. So now for certain services, and this is where the experience comes in. So depending upon the previous questions that have been asked, I'll be giving you a bird's eye view for certain topics, and where required, we'll diving in and we'll be having a deep dive. So for example, AD is definitely very, very important. So we've already covered that quite in detail, but now these topics that come forward might not be of the same intensity as what we were covering in the beginning of Active Directory. Moving to Azure conditional access. So conditional access is a tool in Azure AD that allows or denies two resources based on identity signals such as user, location, and device. A very good example of this will be, and I'm just giving you example of one of them, location. So for example, if one of the employees of a firm, let's say Bahar is, and I'm just going to move and pick names from Zoom, whose ever name I find, just to have everyone's name covered. So let's say Bahar is usually logging in from Montreal into XYZ organization that we have just created. Okay. An organization has just been created where Bahar has been working for, let's say, a few months, and you've been working from Montreal. Suddenly, we see a sign-in request from maybe South America, or maybe USA, or maybe another country, another location. So our safety mechanism will trigger, oh, this is not out of, this is out of the ordinary. In that case, it is going to, maybe deny your request or maybe prompt your request. So conditional access is allow the access, allow it if there's no anomaly, if there's nothing which is out of the ordinary. In case the user is different from a location, or if there's a difference in the behavior, if it's a new device, you can have rules that yes, either I want to allow, either I want to deny, or I want to have some conditions that yes, you need to provide some extra information before you are allowed to gain access to your account. So this tool helps empower users to be productive wherever and whenever while protecting the organization's assets. So you're not asked to have multiple factors again and again, but when it feels it's something suspicious, it can raise the alarm. So it can be convenient, and at the same time, it has its own, watchers that are watching if things are going, and if they feel that okay, something is out of the ordinary, they do a quick risk assessment, and depending upon the risk, they will prompt you on the next actions that need to be followed. Does that make sense to all of you? Give me a thumbs up if it does. Okay. So I think about 14, 15 of you active. Expect a little more participation going forward. So basically, conditional access is like when you are signing in, it is getting a lot of information on the back. It is processing that kind of information, and then it is giving you access depending upon if the conditions are met or not. This is what is required for conditional access. Now comes the interesting part, that is RBAC, that is Azure Role-Based Access Control. In simple words, if I have to explain this in one line to all of you, for example, if 100 people are there in an organization working on Azure, using role-based access control, you can define rules on who is allowed to do what to each and every resource, depending upon what role you are in. Either are you the manager, either you are the vice president, either you are a developer, either you are a tester, either you are a contractor. You could be setting roles that this role is allowed to do this role is allowed to do this. Does that make sense? More on it coming up later, but at a very broad level, it is role-based access control. Depending upon what role you are in, you will have access rights. For example, if you are in a bank, if you are a customer, you cannot access everyone's account details. You can only access your details, right? If you are an employee, you need to do some verification before you can access some details. If you're a manager, you might have a higher level. If you are maybe even on a higher level, you might have much more broader details of the account. So depending upon what role you are in, what role is assigned to you, that is going to define what access controls do you have. So to control access to resources in a cloud environment with multiple IT and engineering teams, it is important to follow the principle of least privilege, which I'm going to come to right now, which means granting access only up to the level needed to complete a task. Now, if you might have seen a lot of spy movies, like I'm a fan of spy movies, there's a very common terminology that is used, that is, when you talk about like safety, secrecy in a lot of like a lot of videos, movies, series, whatever, you'll see there's this concept used, need to know basis, right? You're given information that is only required for you to know. They do not give you anything extra so that you could not misuse it. So for example, if Amandeep is on operation, we'll only provide Amandeep with the information that is required. We will not give anything extra. And that is what is used in cloud computing terms, which is called as least privilege. I will not give you root access if you do not require it. I'm not going to give you access over every resource if you don't require it. It is giving you minimum access that is required to finish your job. If you need to perform a job, you can get the access for a temporary time. You can get it on a specific resource, but it is never going to be giving everyone root access. For example, if you create a machine and 2 or 3 of you are sharing one laptop or system at your home, you might give everyone a root or administrator account. But in an organization, that is not how it happens. Everyone is given a role. You are only given the privilege that is required for you to perform the task. If you need a higher privilege, you need to request for it. Now, when you, however, managing access permissions for everyone can be tedious, because obviously it is a very time-taking task. I cannot give permission to Jatin. I cannot give it to Khalid. I cannot give it to Ruchika. I cannot give it to Amandeep. It's a lot of work. If I have to give it for each and every one, it is very, very difficult for the IT administrator. Tomorrow, 10 interns join in. I need to write code for all 10 of them. Day after tomorrow, someone leaves. I need to revoke their permission. Then someone else is joining in. We need to write the permissions again. It is a very, very tedious task. So what happens is Azure RBAC, role-based access control, enables controlling access through built-in roles or determining custom roles, each within an associated set of access permissions. So for certain permissions, Azure has some default roles: read only, write only, read only compute, write only file, and things of that sort. So it has some permissions which you could use, or you could use your own custom. So you are like, okay, it is out of the ordinary, but I want Khalid to only write on the disk. I want Bowen to only read from the disk. It's a very weird requirement, but depending upon if you have something out of the ordinary, you could be writing those roles, and then those roles could be assigned to individuals or groups that will then be coming under those set of permissions. So rather than saying that Khalid has access to file 1, 2, 3, and Amandeep has access to 5, 6, 7, and Soham has access to file 7, 8, 9, and Steve has 9, 11, 12, 13. What we could do is we could say, okay, access to so and so files is given by people who are developers. Access to this set of files is given to people who are designers. This file is for testers, and then this file is for HR and things of that sort. So you create groups, you create roles, and then you assign those roles to either an individual or a group on your requirements. Is role-based access control to clear to all of you? Give me a thumbs up if it is. I expect all of you to be active by now. So expecting a little more in terms of the activity on the Zoom channel. If it's clear, give me a thumbs up. I do not want a sleeping audience. Okay, awesome. So pretty straightforward stuff. Those of you who are from information system security might have already heard this, used it in some form of the other. So this is a similar concept is available in Azure as well. Now coming to the application of RBAC. So role-based access control is applied to a specific scope. Again, this is a very good thing to look at. You have a scope which can be managed, which can be a management group, subscription resource group, or a single resource. If you remember from our session 1, I believe, we talked about resource. Resource is anything that can be deployed or provisioned. For example, a database instance, for example, a virtual machine, for example, a networking group, for example, a security group that is like a firewall, for example, storage account. These are all resources. When you have multiple resources that you put together, that becomes a resource group. So you could be grouping your resources by the concept of resource group. When you want different billing across different accounts, you can have a different subscription. So this is on the billing level. A different management group will be, let's say, if you have an organization in, let's say, UK, you have another one in US, you have another one in Canada. They're all essentially the same group, but these are, different legal entities. You can have a management group to separate the resources at a management level as well. So when you have grouping of resources, similar resources together and different resources, separate from each other, you can apply role-based access control at any of the level. You could either do it for one resource, you could do it for the group, you could do it for the entire subscription, you could do it for the entire management group. An example of doing it for a resource will be, this resource can be accessed by everyone because it's a public website. You apply the role that public access port 80, public access port 443, like HTTP, HTTPS, you allow. Resource group, you are like, okay, this set of resources only for HR. So you'll have a role that only HR can access it, which you apply to the resource group that belongs to HR. Subscription is, for example, our billing is happening in Montreal, and then our billing is happening in another province in Canada itself. You can have different subscriptions. You can have different, permissions. For example, if a service is, it actually depends upon the use case. For example, a service, if you want a higher budget in Montreal and a lower budget in Toronto, you could be doing that by subscriptions by applying role-based. That, okay, in case of Montreal, since we have a higher budget, so developers can create their own resource. In Toronto, only the vice president can do it, or only the senior management or the supervisor can do it. So those roles and permissions could be set across multiple groups depending upon what your requirement is. And management group will be like, for example, anyone can spin up an instance in Europe, but anyone, if they have to do it in US, they need manager's approval. That kind of role could be applied by a management group. So basically, if you want to apply a role-based access control, it could be on resource group, subscription, or management group. 4 ways to identify resources, which was discussed in lesson, in session 1. If you were not there, you'll have the links to the videos, go through them, you'll understand. For those of you over there, I hope this is clear to all of you. Give me a thumbs up or raise your hand if you have a question. Yes, Ankit, go ahead.
In case of external identities, so like any particular external identity will also be classified into one of these 4 categories, and then they'll be assigned. No. So
first thing, these resources like single resource, resource group, subscription, and management group is everything that is there on Azure Infra. And when you're using Azure role-based access control, Azure will be assigning resources to you so that, for example, if you have access over a resource group, you can access every resource in that resource group. So the permission is for Azure-based resources, not for external entities.
Okay. So for external identities, like sorry, entities, they can just access it's like a view, right? Nothing else.
No, by
No.
default, no one can view your resources. If
Okay.
you are talking about the slide that we were talking about previously,
Yes.
external
Yes.
identities. So
Yeah.
external identities, yes, if you have an external identity, they would be given a mapping identity in Azure. So for example, they can use their Google name to get into Azure. They can
Hmm.
use their Facebook credentials to get into Azure. But within an Azure, once they're in Azure, they would have to be tied up to the resources. So
Yes, one of them. Okay.
yeah, it'll be a different user that will be assigned. So we'll be like, okay, this user belongs to Ankit. This user is signing off, signing on via Google, and this user has so and so permission. So role,
Permissions. Exactly. Yes.
yes. So RBAC of Azure will be applied. It's only your login of Google that is going to be required for you.
Correct. Correct. Yes. Thank you.
Most welcome. Okay. So moving on, zero trust model. Again, a lot of questions on this in the exam. Ankit, any more questions, or can I lower your hand? Okay, thank you. Going on to the zero trust model. So zero trust is a security model that assumes breach and verifies each request as though it is originated from an uncontrolled network. So trust models previously were, for example, if there is some request coming in from Azure, you're assuming that all your resources are secure. That's why it's sending a request. When you are implying a zero trust model, you're not trusting anyone. You want proof at every step. For example, let me give you a very real life example, and I'll have to stop sharing my screen for that. So just look at my actions, okay? Pay attention. Uh, Not the best example, but a very similar example to what we are talking about. Let's say I go into a bar and the legal drinking age for that bar is maybe 18 years. So I need to prove my identity by showing my driver's license, my passport, or any other official document. Once I show that, they allow me to enter. So that is trust. I've established a trust. Every time I order a drink, I do not have to show my ID because they assume that everyone who's in is authenticated or is above. Authenticated is the wrong word. They assume that everyone who's in is above that certain age, okay, because they have proved their identity at the gate. What if someone sneaks in? What if someone tailgates? What if someone enters from the back door? In that case, someone who should not be having served a drink is now able to consume a drink, which is illegal. So a zero trust model will be every time you order something, you prove your identity. Hey, this is my license, please give me a drink. Hey, this is my license, please give me a drink. Hey, this is my passport, give me a drink. Now this might sound very inconvenient to many people, but it is a much more secure way than having established trust once and then using it again and again. So trust model is you trust them at the entrance and then you allow them to send requests again and again. Taking this model to cloud is like you authenticate once and then you use that to send requests again and again. Though that is, I won't say that is very insecure. That is kind of, you've authenticated once, you've authorized them once, but the thing is, you do not know what has changed between the last request or not. Has someone hijacked them? Has someone taken control of their computer? Is someone else trying to make the request? So when we talk about zero trust model, we are not trusting anyone. That means that when we are in the Azure zero trust model, uh, we are assuming that there is a breach, and every request that comes in, breach is basically there's been an attack or something, everything that comes in is treated like it is very very much from the outside network. It is not something safe. We are not assuming anything. It is a security model that adapts to the complexity of the modern environment, embraces the mobile workforce, and protects people, devices, applications, and data wherever they're located. I'll tell you why. Previously, if we used to be working from an office, if I'm sitting in an office, I need to have an ID card to go in. People know me by my face. There's a system assigned to me. I can log in and people know that this guy is there. If someone else logs in by threatening a gun over me, they'll not be able to do that because people will recognize. People will be like, okay, you don't look like Javesh, you look like someone else. So they might report the person to the security. But now, since I'm working from home and we do not have the zero trust model, the problem will be I have logged in, I left my system running. Someone else can impersonate my identity by sitting on my device. I might know it, I might not know it, because today the complexity is very different. People are working from home, they're using mobile devices, the number of attacks have gone up. That's why this zero trust security model is very, very required, where you ask the person to prove the identity again and again, again and again, till the time you're sure that, okay, with every request, you need to prove your identity. Does this make sense to all of you? Pretty straightforward stuff, I guess, with the example. Highly inconvenient, but very secure. You prove your identity at every step so that, no, the probability of attacks goes down very, very significantly. Okay. Now, this is a very fancy term used in security. Many of you who are learning information system security might have heard this at some place or the other. It's called having layers of defense. It's called defense in depth, where you're not just having one level of security, you have multiple levels of security to be sure that minimum attacks happen. So defense in depth is a security strategy that uses a series of mechanisms to slow the advance of an attacker that aims at acquiring unauthorized access to data. Please understand this. What happens is with defense in depth, no one in security will tell you we are 100% secure, because there's something called a 0 day. It is an attack which has not been discovered. Tomorrow there's a new outage, there's a new attack that comes in. People cannot be sure, and they cannot go ahead and say, right, that we have full defense, we are, no one can penetrate in a website, no one can hack a website. That's not the term you use these days. You can try to be as safe as possible, but you can never achieve 100%, because something new might just come up in the future. That's why it is very, very important to slow down the attacker instead of saying that you stop the attacker. Most cases, the attacker will get stopped if it's a known bug, but if it is a 0 day attack which has not been discovered, your system might deal with it, might not deal with it, depends upon the type of attack. And that's why it's called 0 day. You do not know when it will happen, how it will happen. You cannot be prepared for something that has not happened. Tomorrow, if we see a new form of attack and we have never seen it before, it's very difficult to protect against it, right? We do not know how it's going to work. For example, let's say if there is a new disease that comes out, it takes time to produce a vaccine for it because we have not seen it before. That's why we need to produce, we need to test, we need to be sure that it's going to work before we can be, administrating the doses to people. So with that being said, it is very, very similar. You slow down. It is you just having multiple layers. For example, if someone's trying to enter your password, if they enter a wrong password, ask them to enter after 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. That is slowing down the person. So that makes your system more secure. For example, if someone steals my phone, they try to enter the password after 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 attempts, it blocks for 1 minute. Then it locks for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And if they keep entering the wrong password at a particular point of time, this is going to be bricked forever. Does that make sense? So basically, when we talk about defense in depth, our strategy, our end goal is to slow the attacker down with as many hurdles as we can put in the way of the attacker getting access to a device or resource or whatever it is. Does that make sense? Okay. So the defense in depth strategy can be visualized as a set of layers with data to be secured at the center and all other layers functioning to protect the central data. I'm just going to come to this in the next slide where I've visualized this, where it'll be slightly easier for all of us to understand what this is. But in simple terms, you are using different security tools, different features to enable this. So defense in depth is a security concept. Azure promotes this concept and it provides security tools and features at every level of defense in depth concept, making it easier for organization to protect their data and applications. Now, what happens these days is, or what used to happen previously as well, you used to have data stored maybe in a database. There used to be an application on top of it, which was able to access the data. You had some server that was actually your compute source. You had a network through which you could access this. You have a perimeter that's surrounding it, and Okay. Coming back. Okay, so you have a parameter that is surrounding it. You have identity and access. You have physical security. So basically, starting from defense in depth, starting with physical security, Azure is making sure that the data centers are secure. If you go to Azure documentation, again, this is not a part of the course, but let's say if you are super curious about how they secure the data centers, they have people who can access it. Everyone cannot come in. They have security guards. They have multiple layers of physical security before one can hit an actual data center. Once you go over there, there's identity and access management, which is we trying to access an Azure account. We need to enter our username, password, passwordless login, whatever we are using to enter it. Then there's a parameter, which is not required for the exams. I'm not going deep in this. There is network, that is your virtual private cloud, your subnets, networks that we talked about previously. There is compute, which is computing the data. So you're having an antivirus such as Defender, which I'll talk about in the coming slides, which allows you to safeguard your compute resource. There's an application. For application, obviously, you need, if you're writing your own application, you need to, implement the best practices. And if Azure is giving you software as a service, their applications have a lot of security around them as well. And here we're talking about application security, which they test via pen testing and other techniques. And then you have data which is being you know uh, which is residing in the database. So let's say someone needs to attack, they will have to go through all these steps. So first they'll be slowed down at physical security, then they'll be slowed down in IAM, then they'll be slowed down on parameter, then on network, then on compute, then on application, and finally data will be encrypted as well. So, and this again depends upon your implementation. So there's no hard and fast. Basically, the concept of defense in depth says that there are multiple layers to safeguard your data, so that even if one goes down, the other will be there. And we never say it's 100% secure. It just slows down because now an attacker needs to go through physical security. If it's a network attack, obviously they won't have to go through these layers, but then they can start from here, here, here. So it is not exposing your data to the world. It is having multiple layers so that you can have more trust, more security around what you are having on the Azure cloud. Pretty straightforward stuff. You do not need to remember the layer for the exam. All you need to know is defense in depth is securing every layer all the way up to where your data is stored within a system. Okay. Now, one thing which is very important for the certification, always remember, wherever you see Azure or Microsoft in the beginning of a service, they are definitely going to ask something related to that in the certification. In most cases, again, so Microsoft Defender is not the most popular concept. Now, with Azure, what they've done is whatever core services that they had that were working really well on Windows, they put them in Azure. Taking the best service that is generating a lot of money and putting it on cloud, obviously a lot of people are going to use it. And that's why they ask a lot about it within the certifications as well. If Azure has to use some other XYZ service, they might have to have a contract or they have to use it. But if something is built by Microsoft in-house, that is something which is usually asked in the exams. You need to be prepared for that well. These questions are usually there. Usually the answer to these questions is always positive. So, and I'm just telling you a general mindset. So when I show you some sample questions, you'll understand better. Just 50 minutes before we finish all of this and go into the questions. Going forward, Defender for Cloud is a monitoring tool that helps to strengthen the security posture of cloud, on-premise, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments. It provides guidance, notifications, and protection against cyber attacks. Its deployment is easy as it is natively integrated with Azure. Natively integrated with Azure because it's a Microsoft product. They took Microsoft Defender, put it on the cloud, obviously made some changes to it to work on the cloud. But again, it's a very well trusted, it's a very well used antivirus engine that is now giving assurance to Azure as well. If someone's using Azure, they can be, assured that yes, my data is not going to go somewhere wrong. They have security around it. So a good thing for people, right? A really good thing for people in terms of the security that is provided to them. Now, going forward, and then I was just looking at the slide we are. So we're just going to about to come to cost management. And it's more of like now we're going to come to the closure. Everything we discuss after this is going more towards the ending of the content, and then we can focus more on the questions if we have some extra time. So just pay attention and as I said, for the certification, if you listen to me right now, if you ask your questions now or after the session, and you go through the content, as I said, this is the gist, this is the summary of what the documentation is. It's not going to take a lot of time, what it takes to read the documentation, and you'll finish the content quite quickly, and you'll be well prepared for the certification. So talking about Defender, since we were talking about Microsoft Defender on cloud, Defender for Cloud provides continuous assessment of your environments with vulnerability assessment solutions for virtual machines, container registries, and SQL servers. So basically, this is where they specialize. They're going to go through your VMs, they're going to scan your VMs, they're going to check your Docker containers or the containers that you have on Azure Container Service. And they also scan for SQL servers. So if there is some, string over there, some data over there that is not the which should not be there, which could be a potential harm to the system. Like, for example, someone has passed in something malicious in an SQL query, and that is stored in the database. So it can do the assessment. It can find out what's going wrong. It has integration with Defender for endpoint. So you can look at the vulnerabilities that are used in the industry. A lot of corporates today are using Defender, and Defender is a very well-known product. So using that product on Azure gives you automatic assurance that yes, scan results are there. Whatever I'm using is kind of safe, right? So that is the Defender for Cloud platform. It is secure because it is flexible. It has custom tailored policies. So you can be like, okay, if there's something wrong in SQL, don't worry, that's my test data. So you can have policies, please allow this. This is my test data. This is my prod data. Over here, please, this is very, very critical. Scan this multiple times. Let me know if something is wrong. You could be setting things off, that sort. And then it helps you defend as well. So if there is a live attack that is happening, it is going to stop that. So if it feels that something is going on with the resources, if someone's trying to do what they should not be doing, it's going to raise alerts, and it's going to give you the steps on how to stop. So if you look at this definition, Defender for Cloud defends your environments by generating alerts. It provides the remediation steps and advanced threat protection features. So Fusion Kill Chain Analysis helps you understand the full story of an attack campaign, and vulnerability assessment solutions for your VMs, container registry, and SQL servers provide regular detailed vulnerability scans. So it's scanning continuously. It is also doing some testing for you, and it's going to give you some data that yes, I've done this testing. This is what has come back positive. This is what has come back negative. I think you should be fixing this. I think that's a very unsafe configuration you have for your container. Please do this to remediate. So it's not just like it's telling you that something is wrong. It's telling you something is wrong. This is how you fix it. So that's why it's not just a Defender solution. It's a more cloud tailored solution, but it comes with the same backing of the Microsoft Defender product, which is a well-tested product used by so many machines across the world. Now, as I said, looking at the further topics that we have to discuss is about billing, is about pricing, is about comparing its total cost of operations, it's about resources, resource logs. Now, these topics are there for the exam, and they are kind of straightforward. They're not super difficult. We'll easily be able to finish them in the next 45 minutes. Ask me as many questions as you have. Take notes if you have to. I'm quite sure if you go in the right way, we'll be done with these concepts within the session itself, so that if you're just making notes, if you're understanding everything, you might not even have to spend a lot of time revising them. Very straightforward stuff. So when we talk about billing, what influences the cost that you pay? What resource type do you have? Do you have 8 CPUs? Do you have 16 CPUs? Do you have 32 CPUs? Or do you have a very high network interface? You have a very high read speed disk or a very write speed disk, a slow disk, archival service, hot tier, cold tier, everything that we have discussed. So depending upon what resource type you have, that is one factor considered when you get the bill. Second is consumption. How much did you use? Did you use it 1 GB, 2 GB, 3 GB, or 1 hour a day, 2 hour a day, 3 hour a day? Depending upon the type of service, you'll get an idea. Second is maintenance. What was the maintenance window? Did Azure do the maintenance? Did you do the maintenance? Obviously, services that are managed by Azure are expensive because they need to do the hard work. Geography, different pricing from different places. Now, I'm not sure if I talked about this last time or not, but it's very important. Same service is going to cost you different in different locations. It might be same in many, it might be expensive in many. The logical explanation to this is economies at scale. If they have more servers in a specific location, the cost will be low. If they have less servers in a specific location, the cost will be high. If the cost of operating a data center is low in one place, it's going to be low. The cost of operating in another country is high, it's going to be high. And then the subscription types, depending upon if you have a 1 year subscription, 3 year subscription, or pay as you go subscription, that is going to be a billing factor. Basically, what you need to know for the certification, what factors can influence your bill, what bill you'll be getting at the end of the month. That depends upon what resource type you used, how much did you use it, did you do the maintenance on your own or did they do the maintenance for you, where did you have the resource, and did you pay upfront, did you pay as you go, did you had some contract, or how much do you use? Does that make sense to all of you? Obviously, the people who use the resources more frequently get it for a lower price. People who use it less frequently get it for a higher price. That's why it's called pay less as you go more pricing, is something that is followed by almost all cloud service providers. The more you use, the cheaper it gets for you. Talking on resource type, that is the first billing factor. So resource cost depends upon variation factors such as the settings, the region, the usage. For example, if you have a multi-AZ deployment, you have 2 copies of your data within 2 different Azure regions. So Azure needs to move your data synchronously from one to the other. And if one goes down, it needs the other to be available for you. Since Azure is doing the multi-AZ deployment for you, so multi-AZ is going to be expensive. If you go to Azure that, hey, I'm not having very critical data, just have 1 copy of it. I'm good with 99.95% uptime. I do not want 99.99%. You might just go for single AZ and then the resource will be cheaper. This is pretty straightforward basic maths. So, if you go for a higher end service, if you go for more resilience, if you go for multiple copies, you're making it more secure, but you are paying more money. Simple maths. Any questions across this? As I'm saying now, these topics are easy. We are on the light part. We've finished all the main concepts. These are just, you need to know what factors influence the pricing. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Jatin, go ahead.
No, I don't have a question.
Oh, no question? Okay, awesome. Going forward, the next thing is consumption. So Azure offers pay-as-you-go model, which we all know. So, you get a monthly bill. If you use it for 10 hours, you get paid for 10 hours. Use it for 50, you get a bill for 50. You use it for 100, you get a bill for 100. Okay. However, I just talked about this in the previous slide. You can commit and you can get a discount, which is called as a reserved resource. Understand. Let me stop sharing my screen. Let me get all your attention to me. If, let's say from Azure standpoint of view, tomorrow Vishal comes in and Vishal says, I want, 100 CPU machine running 100 GB of RAM. I am not sure how long I'm going to use it, but I want it for now. So Azure needs to be prepared for offering that request, right? So they're unprepared. That's why they'll be saying, okay, we'll give this to you. This is what it's going to cost you. Harshpreet comes and says, okay, I want a 10 CPU machine and maybe 5 GB RAM. They'll be like, okay, we do not have 10 CPU. We have 12 and 6. Does that work? Okay, yeah, that works for me. Give that to me. So machine deployed. But then, these requirements go up and down. People might come, they might have the requirements. People might go, they will, decommission the machine. But Azure needs to have some physical hardware to back it up, right? They're not sure. Someone is there today, they can leave tomorrow. If they leave tomorrow, what am I going to do of the resource? I need to find someone else who needs to use it, right? That's why they're going to charge you X amount of cost for that. But let's say if Ankit comes in and says, Azure, I want this resource. I'm giving you a commitment. I want it for 1 year. Azure will be like, okay, that kind of looks nice because if you're taking it for 1 year, that takes the pain out of our mind that, we need to find a new vendor again and again. They're like, okay, we like what you have. We know you're going to consume this for quite some time. So we will be giving you a 72%, like, a 50%, 60%, 70% discount, depending upon the commitment that you give. If you reserve something for 3 years, it's going to be much cheaper. You reserve something for 1 year, it is going to be still cheaper than pay as you go, but obviously more expensive than 3 years. So depending upon the longer commitment you give, the cheaper your resource gets. Think of it like a hotel. You book a hotel, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars to book that, and then you go to the hotel and you tell them, I'm going to stay for 1 month, can you give me a discount? They'll be like, okay, since you are staying for a longer time, that kind of looks attractive to us, so we could definitely give you a discount and you could be paying that kind of money. So if you look into it, the same thing is represented over here, which says it also provides the option to commit to using a set number of resources in advance and receive discounts on reserved resources up to 72%. So depending upon the larger the duration of your booking, you will be getting discounts all the way up to 72%, which is huge. So if you are sure your company needs that resource for as a bare minimum, put that resource in a reserved instance, and anything that comes in overhead, you might need more, you might need less, put that in a spot or put that in as a pay-you-go model. Does that make sense to all of you? Give me a thumbs up if that's clear. I hope everyone who's left is now active. Yes, Jatin, go ahead.
So this commitment that you talk about, it's like in like months, years, like a contract, or it's
It's a
like
1 year or a 3 year contract.
okay,
So,
okay, thanks.
and it varies from service to service, but generally, if you go with the compute service, either you go provision it for as long as you want and then you pay by the hour, or you get a 1 year contract or a 3 year contract, depending upon what you want with them.
So following up on that, so if I have a requirement where like I need to run some research project of mine for, let's say, like a week, so I just go with the pay as you go model, or like they
Yes.
have other offerings for
No,
that?
no, no. You go with the pay as you go model.
Thank you.
Okay, most welcome. Ankit, go ahead.
So the way I understand is, so we have, like, does the consumer have two options? Like, he has to choose between pay as you go and the reserved in option, or
Yes.
is it like one on top of another? So for example, once we exceed the quota of pay as you go, then we start consuming resources from reserved option.
No, you
Oh, right.
choose what you want. Let's
Okay.
say it is now I know of a property here in downtown, which is also a hotel and is also an apartment within the same property. If I book a room for a day, I pay by the day basis. But if I take a lease for the entire year, that costs me much, much less for the same apartment. It's a service apartment. Similarly, in Azure, you tell them that yes, I'm going to take this for 1 year or 3 years, but you cannot break it, right? You cannot
Got
break
it.
it. You're taking it for 1 year. So you get that, you get ownership of that. You're paying much lower cost. On the other hand, you're like, I want to go with pay as you go, so I'm just going to pay you as the bill comes.
Understood. Okay. Thank you.
Most welcome. Okay, moving on is maintenance. So using resource groups in Azure can help keep all resources organized, and maintaining the cloud environment is essential for cost control. Rapidly adjusting resources based on demand is possible in the cloud, but deprovisioning VMs may not deprovision additional resources at the same time. Keeping an eye on the resources and removing unnecessary resources can help control costs. Very, very important. Again, I'll stop sharing the screens because I want to explain the intensity of this concept. If you have a VM and you are just using 10% of your VM, and you're not reducing to a smaller size, or if you're not reducing to a smaller number of virtual machines, you are the one at fault and you'll be paying for it. So you cannot go to Azure, hey Azure, I just use 5% of a machine, why are you asking me to pay $100 for this? They'll ask you to pay what it is. You need to have code. You need to have a way where you write code like, okay, if the requirement is more, I'm going to scale up. If the requirement is less, I'm going to scale down. So you need to decide that code. That maintenance is the responsibility of the consumer, not of the cloud service provider. So You might be paying a lot if you're not keeping a check. And if you are keeping the check, contrary to that, you might just be paying a fraction of the cost rather than paying the entire thing. So it's very important that you maintain your resources, you keep a track of what you are consuming, you only pay for what is required, and you scale down when resources are not being used. If you stop a virtual machine, it still has the hard disk. Don't remember to terminate it if it is absolutely required. And this is where the role of an solution architect comes into play. The architect write rules and regulations on how the machines will go up, how the machines will scale down, and the developer translates that into infrastructure as code. And then when your code is running, depending upon the traffic, you can either go up or you can scale down, how looking at how the requirement is uh, how the requirement is at the runtime. Does that make sense? Okay. Geography, obviously, the cost of power, labor, taxes, and fees is different. So Azure regions have different pricing for different services at different places. You can always refer to the pricing, which I'll talk about in a bit, on the Azure website, where you can see the prices going up and down. You can choose the region that suits best for you. Sometimes the region closest to your users might not be the cheapest region. So you can do a cost analysis, you can do a performance analysis and decide what to do. For example, to give you an idea, prior to my current job, when I started, studying at Concordia, and I was handling some freelance projects in India, I had customers in India who were very strict on the cloud cost. And what we did for them was we did not provision servers in India because India, the regions that were supported in India at that time were much more expensive than the US region. So what we did was we took US servers to deploy their websites to cut on the cost. Certain customers have come to me in the past who have got this requirement that they want performance over pricing. So they want a server, closest to their end users. They're like, we don't mind the cost being extra, but we want the website to load in a fraction of a second. So depending upon what the requirement is, you can select what region works best for your resources. Obviously, the pricing for every region is going to vary because of X, Y, and Z, all the reasons that you see over here, the power, labor, taxes, and fees, pretty straightforward stuff. So again, for the certification, all you need to know is the geography impacts the pricing. So different regions, same service running in different regions gives you a different cost. Next is a subscription type. So coming to this, so when you go for a free account, we get 12 months free, we get some services for 30 days free, we get $200 credits, we get additional service that are always free, we get a student discount, again, depending upon what subscription you are. For example, since like when we did the practical last time, it was not a big one, we just touch based a little bit on the practical by creating the account. Since no one attached their credit cards, we are all part of the free subscription, which gives us some services which are always free, some services that are free for 12 months, and certain number of dollars that we could be investing towards our Azure subscription. That's about the subscription. And now going to TCO calculator, that's total cost of ownership, which is very, very important. When organizations want to move to cloud, this is the tool that they use. Again, you need to know about what this tool is. But if you join an organization that already has migrated to cloud, it's not something which is commonly used. But usually organizations that are planning to move to cloud, they do this calculation because if you remember, we did talk about CapEx and OpEx. So on-premises capital expenditure, you need to have money in your account to run an on-premise solution, but then you do not need to pay very frequently because the cost of operations is low. In cloud, you need to pay less capital expense and it's more operational expense. So that's what comes into play. So the pricing calculator estimates the cost of provisioning resources in Azure, while the TCO calculator helps compare the cost of running an on-premise infrastructure with an Azure cloud infrastructure. So pricing is a tool that you run for calculating what a service is going to cost you in Azure. You give information like, I want a VM with so-and-so CPU, so-and-so RAM, so-and-so disk, so-and-so operating system. And they'll be like, okay, I think B1S works best for you. It's going to cost you $15 a month and so, whatever the cost might be. And if you use a TCO, you're like, okay, this is what it costs in on-premise. This is what it costs in Azure. So these two tools are required. You just need to know the name of these tools. pricing calculator for calculating the price on Azure, TCO calculator for comparing the price on Azure with comparing the price of a similar resource that you might have on premise. Does that make sense? A lot of organizations need to do this calculation before they can come on to a conclusion on if they want to go to the cloud or if they want to stick on premise. Please make a note of this. This is a very common asked question: TCO, total cost of ownership, and pricing for calculating the price in Azure. Just give me about 15 seconds. I need to open the window. It's getting a little hot in. Yep, I am back. Moving on, let me just clear the screen. Let me see where we are in terms of slides. Let's go back to sharing the screen again. Okay, we are on slide 133. We need to cover 15 slides in the next 30 minutes. That's not a very unachievable target. Quite a few things to do. Again, estimate workload cost using price calculator. As I said, these practicals are not required for the certification. And looking at the number of questions that have been answered in the session, skipping these for now. However, you have the slides. If you don't, you'll be given them today. You can go through it. If try to do the practicals on your own, not super difficult. You'll find something or the other resource on the internet. There's so many people who have done it, basic stuff. If you still don't understand them, this could be a good topic of discussion next week in the break, not in the teaching time. Okay, just one more thing to bring to all of your attention. Would you tell all important topics once at the end? Yes, Soham, I would be more than happy to discuss all the topics that you need to pay extra attention to for the certification. And just one more thing before that, that is, I just forgot about it. What was it? Topics for exams and next week. Yep. So next week we have two classes, next Saturday and Sunday. In those two classes, we will cover content for AI-900 certification. Trust me, it is one of the easiest certifications. Before I talk more, I just thought, I've been speaking continuously to gain everyone's attention back. How many of you have heard of ChatGPT or have ever used ChatGPT? Just raise your hands. How many of you have ever heard of it, used it? Just to get a rough idea, how many of you are active? Quite a few. Quite a few. Okay, thank you so much. All of you can lower your hands. Now, the AI-900 certification that we would prepare for next week. So next week, okay. So Khalid, right now, Saturday's class, Sunday's class, and today's class. These three sessions are for AZ-900 Azure Cloud Fundamental Certification. The content is enough for someone to go through and you'll be good to give the AZ-900 certification. There are about 148 slides in which the entire content has been covered. You can go through it and that'll be, you'll be at a good spot to give the exam. How to give the exam, stuff like that. Stick around till 3. I'll talk more about that later. Second thing, why I was talking about AI-900 certification, because today when we finish about AZ-900, next week, it's just Saturday, Sunday, it'll be in continuation. In those 2 days, we'll cover the content for AI-900, which is a very, very easy exam, one of the easiest exams in Azure. The content is very less, it's pretty straightforward, and now they've updated the entire thing. I was working on the slides this week because I had some time, and I realized that the content has totally changed. The content that I used to teach 3 months before and the content that they have in the exam now is very, very different. Reason being, they've integrated a lot of information about ChatGPT. So that is really fun to study when you guys come to the classes on Saturday and Sunday. In those 2 days, we'll learn about that. So it's pretty straightforward stuff. And we have definitely some practicals planned for that as well. So what I've planned is that I'll share my screen. I'll show you some practicals. You guys can observe. You guys can do the same if you want to on your screen. But we will not wait for everyone to do the practical because again, with the larger crowd, it gets difficult. Maybe ECSGA could help send another email for those people who missed AZ-900, could maybe join next Saturday and Sunday for AI-900 because that's an individual certification. Again, Since this is a workshop series, it covers 3 certifications. That is one certification which one could give pretty easily, pretty straightforward. Okay. Let's see. Now we finished the material for AZ. So we are almost finished with the material for AZ-900. Just a few more slides. I needed a break from that. So I started talking about AI-900. Important topics. Yes, I'll talk about all of them. And OpenAI, yes, a lot of content for OpenAI in the AI-900 certification, which we'll discuss next week. Okay, about virtual training day, let's keep it after 3. I'm just going to come to that. Okay, I hope all of you can see my screen. Let's go back to slide. Okay, comparing workload costs using TCO calculator is one task that we had to do, but leaving that for now. Coming to cost management tool. So the cost management is an Azure service that helps user check Azure resources cost, create alerts based on cost, spending, and create budgets to automate resource management. Let me give you an example, something which I always do. If I'm creating a new Azure resource, what I'll do is I'll set a budget for $0.01. And I do this for testing. Okay. And whenever my students work with me, this is what we do when we have attached our credit cards. So by mistake, if we turn on a resource and we forget to turn it off, our budget is $0.01. We'll get an alert at a very early stage and we'll not have to pay anything beyond that. Does that make sense? So if you have credits, you're using a service with credits, it's not unlimited free. You're just testing on something. You can use a cost management tool to set a budget that, hey, my budget is only 1 cent. Do not make me pay more than 1 cent. And Azure is like, okay, use whatever you have. The moment you hit 1 cent, I'm going to stop it. Does that make sense to all of you? So those features could be used to make sure that you are testing beyond. So as I was saying, the free tier, like you have AWS free tier in Azure, the free system is a little different. Certain services are free for, maybe let's say forever, certain for 12 months, certain for 30 days. And certain services are like, they are paid, but they give you credits. They're like, okay, you're new to Azure, hello, have $200 for test. Now, if I am testing a service which is consuming a lot of money and I forget to turn off the resource, before I start it, what I do, I set an alert. Hey, Azure, I'm a student and I'm not talking on my behalf. I'm talking about, when I teach, this is what we do. Hey, I'm a student. I only have 1 cent as a budget. Do not make me spend more than 1 cent. So the moment it hits 1 cent, please notify, please stop, please alert, whatever I want to do. The course of action is then defined. So it makes my life very easy using the cost management tool where it has a hard stopping option. It has an option to stop the spending if the budget is reaching above a certain threshold. Does that make sense? Pretty straightforward stuff. Azure tags. Again, this is very similar to AWS. If someone has done it, it is used for tagging resources. For example, within an organization, you might have hundreds and thousands of machines running, virtual machines, databases, servers, and whatnot. Tomorrow, if you want to look at something and you want to know, why did someone create it? What is the purpose of this virtual machine? What application is it running? Rather than logging in into every machine and understanding what is happening, an easier way for me would be that, okay, let me tag the resources. If we tag the resources, I can just search for that tag and I'll get a list of all the resources. So everything that you provision in a cloud, for example, a virtual machine, a database, a networking group, or whatever resource it is, just tag it. If you tag a resource, you can refer to the resources from the tag. So if I go with the definition, resources in the cloud, so organizing the resources is important for cost, operation, security, and compliance. So resources tag provide metadata about resources and can be managed through various tools. Azure policy can enforce tagging rules and conventions. Example tags include app name, cost center, owner, environment, and impact. In simple words, what I explained earlier is what you need to know. If you want to group resources, you do resource groups. If you want to tag a resource, for example, hey, within this group, this is for front-end website, this is for HR management system, this is for payroll management system, you can tag all your resources. It's like giving additional information so that someone can look at them. They do not need to log in into the resource. They'll know what this resource is doing on the cloud. I think that was pretty straightforward. Blueprints. Sorry. Okay, so Azure Blueprints help standardize cloud subscription or environment developments by defining repeatable settings and policies that are applied as new subscriptions are created. Artifacts are components in the blueprint definition that can include policy assignments, role assignments, resource manager templates, and resource groups. Artifacts can contain configuration parameters and blueprints and a lot of stuff. Let's not go into this in simple words. Azure blueprint. You need a blueprint, as the term says, to replicate. So tomorrow, if you create a new subscription due to any XYZ region, let's say we have, an office in Quebec, we have one in Ontario, and then we open a third one in British Columbia, and we do not want to have to apply the same thing again and again and again. What we'll do is we'll create a blueprint, and that blueprint could be used for working on multiple subscriptions. So these blueprints contain information of settings and policies that could be reapplied. Does that make sense to all of you? Alokik, I did not get the question. Pop-up menu in Windows icon. I think I missed the context for Azure tags. So still not getting it for Azure tags. So Azure tags in simple is just like you giving information about a resource. So if someone can go and see what that thing is doing. Okay. Moving on from blueprints, again, less time, more content. Azure policy. Just want to keep a track of where we are. Okay, we are on a good spot. Last few slides left before we end the session. So Azure policy enables the creation, assignment, and management of policies to audit resources, ensure they comply. For example, let's say, you can have defining individual policies or groups, which can be given at multiple levels. So for example, if I talk about Azure policy, it helps us in evaluation and highlighting non-compliant resources and can automatically remediate some issues. It also integrates with Azure DevOps and includes built-in policies and initiative definitions. So Azure policy is like, it is one service that you're using for creating, assigning, and managing the policies to control and audit your resources. For example, it's a central policy at a cloud level. You're telling Azure, hey Azure, I want these services to block all the ports so that no one can easily attack them. That is an example. That is something which you can ensure using the Azure policy. So tomorrow, if a new developer by mistake opens a new port, policy is going to alert you, hey, this is against the organization policy, or this is against the policy of Azure that your organization account is running right now. So that's what you can do with Azure policy. You can look at you can create, you can assign, and you can manage the policies to different resources, all at a very broad scale. Next is resource locks. So Azure resource locks prevent accidental deletion of modification of critical cloud resources. For example, let's say we have a VM, okay, and that VM is very critical to the operations of the organization. I do not want someone new to just delete that by mistake when they have started to, work on cloud. So what we could be doing is we could have a resource lock. This resource lock will make sure that this resource is now you cannot delete it. You first need to remove the lock, and then only you can edit it or you can make changes to it. Does that make sense to all of you? If you lock a resource, it is like you telling, hey, Azure, this is what I want to lock. No one can just go, no one can just delete. It is a protected resource. Only certain actions are allowed. So if I look at what is happening over here, you can see Azure locks prevent accidental deletion or modification of a critical cloud resource and can be applied to individual resources, resource groups, or even subscription. So for example, if the organization is making money via the sales website, you can have everything in the subscription. You can have a lock across it. You're like, this is locked, you cannot delete it. For example, you can modify the HR management system. You can do that for payroll management. Even if it goes down for some time, the organization is not losing money. So it actually depends. I mean, I'm no one to comment on, if something should be on lock or something should not. That depends upon the organization. So if something is super, super critical for you, use a resource lock so no one goes and deletes anything or modifies anything by mistake. So there are two types of locks. One is delete, which prevents deletion uh, of a resource, and read only, which restricts users from reading access. So read only is, uh, it restricts authorized users to read only access. So only certain people can read only the resource. They cannot modify it. And delete is making sure that no one can delete it. So these are some basic things that are used. Again, not super critical for exam, but just remember it at a very broad level. Some resource cannot be modified. That's why you put a resource lock, which makes sure that no one can delete or modify your resource. Now, configuring a resource lock, you create a resource, obviously. That's the first step. You apply read only. Now, this is again a task which we're not doing, but I'll just walk you through what are the steps to lock a resource. Obviously, before you start locking a resource, you need to have one. So create a resource. It could be a virtual machine, it could be a database, it could be a storage service. You apply the read only resource lock. So when you're creating it, there's an option. Do you want to lock the resource? You can add the container to, now this is with example to a storage account. So you can add some container over there. You can modify the container. You can delete the storage account, and then you can remove the delete lock. So basically, these are just some steps that you need to do. You need to have a resource before you can have a lock. And then you can decide on, if you try to delete something with the lock on, you'll not be able to delete it. If you have a read-only lock, you'll only be able to read only. Depending upon how you configure it, it's just to safeguard your Azure resources. I know I'm a little fast in these topics, but that is because they're not super, super important. And again, practicals are not absolutely required, but yeah, that's a bird's eye view. Now, since all of you have sticked almost till the end, just last 5 slides, I do not want to overspill by 3. I want us to finish around 3 because many of you might have a hard stop. I know it's not easy to be available on the weekends. So I do respect all your time. And for that reason, I'm just skipping some things which are not required. I'm not even skipping those things. I'm just walking you real quick through those things which are absolutely not required. For whatever is required, we're paying more attention to it. However, this slide covers everything in detail. Most of your questions will be answered from what you read over here. Okay. Service Trust Portal. So the Microsoft Service Trust Portal is a portal that provides access to information, tools, and resources about Microsoft security, privacy, compliance practices. It contains details about Microsoft's implementation of controls and processes that protect cloud services and customer data. Access requires signing in with the Microsoft Cloud Service account and accepting the non-disclosure agreement. So this is basically the place where you can see how your data is safeguarded, how your data is secured, what are the rules and regulations around it, what are the policies. Honestly, not something which you'll use very frequently, but something which is required that you know it for the certification. Tools to interact with Azure. So Azure provides multiple tools for managing your environment. First, obviously, is the Azure portal. So if I go to the Azure portal, which we opened last time, that is one way to interact. There is another service called Azure PowerShell, which is an extension to the Windows PowerShell, which is specialized for Azure resources, and we call it Azure PowerShell. There is Azure CLI. If you open the Azure account, you'll be able to see this. Now, since I think I'm almost done with everything, I'll just quickly open the Azure account to show you what the CLI is. Just give me a second. Let me open the Azure portal on my screen. So this is azure.microsoft.com. Let's sign in. Multiple IDs. Now, as I am a pass out, I'm not super sure if it will allow me or not, but trying my best. Yes, see, this is single sign on. I will sign on into my Concordia account and I'll be good to go. Okay, I think some issue with my Concordia account. Not super sure why that is happening. I might have to reset or something. So I might not be able to show you further, but yeah, that's how it looks. Let me try logging in from my other account if that works. By the way, when you see this on your screen, sign in with GitHub. This is an example of using another identity. Now, as many of you already might know that Microsoft has acquired GitHub. That's why they allow sign in via GitHub. Uh, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'll try one more time if the Concordia login works. Oh, wait, I think I'm using the wrong name. Oh, yes. And this is multi-factor authentication. So a lot of things that we talked about today, you're seeing it are being used constantly. Okay, so I'm inside my Azure account. So first way of accessing Azure is the Azure portal. So I can create a resource like, just by clicking over here. Or another way of accessing Azure could be if I click on the top right in the Cloud Shell, you can see that, let me expand it. See, I have the option of using Azure PowerShell or using Bash, depending upon what works best for me. Let's say I have to create a storage, obviously, for using it, because then I'm running a couple of accounts. So I created a subscription, a student account, which is Azure for Students, which I'll quickly talk about while this loads. So if I just click on Azure for Students, you'll see what is given for free. We were testing and playing around with quite a few services last time. That gave me a bill of $0.02, again, too less. So you can see this is the time and the duration for each and every service, for how long was it running. This is the current cost I have. It will also show me what kind of, which university did I start this plan from? What are the details of the plan? So if I go in and if I search for education, it will tell me what kind of services are there for free. And it also says that I have 136 out of $136 because it gave me 100 US dollars of credit. So converted that to Canadian, $136 worth of free credit. And this expires in 359 days, a lot of time. I created this account last week with all of you. It's been about a week. So 365 days is like 1 year of free access to this money and some additional resources as well, which I can see on the right. Okay. And now you can see, so multiple ways of accessing Azure. One could be the portal. Second could be the CLI. So currently I'm running the CLI within Azure itself, but I could be, running it outside Azure as well. And then I could run some basic commands to, access Azure. I hope this makes sense to all of you. So you can see, a lot of services that could be used. So if I want to work on Azure, either I can use my machine, connect to Azure, run commands on the Azure command line interface, or I could be using the portal that I can see behind me. So this is a very small thing I wanted to talk about, not going to go in detail. I'll come back to my slides. So how can you access Azure? You can use the portal, you can use PowerShell, you can use command line interface. All the options are there. PowerShell was one option, CLI is one option, and portal, obviously, you can see. So the Azure portal is a web-based unified console, which we have already seen. So you do not even need to read all of this. I can just clean this up. So portal is something which you see in the web. CLI is when you are connected via a command line interface to Azure, you can run commands to create a service, provision a service, delete it, scale it up, scale it down, whatever you want. And then a similar thing could be done from PowerShell as well, which gives you more features over the command line. Okay, so in simple words, what you need to remember for the exam is Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI are installable on Windows, Linux, Mac platform, as well as you can access them via Azure Cloud Shell, which I just did right now. So you could do that you can run the CLI within the Azure portal, which is Azure Cloud Shell, or you could have it installed in Windows, Linux, or Mac, depending upon what your requirement is. This time I'm exhausted myself, so sorry for the wrong pronunciation, but yeah, I hope you guys get the idea. Okay, going forward, just last 3 slides left. So the Azure Resource Manager, ARM, is a management layer that allows users to create, update, and delete resources in their Azure account. So when I was clicking on create a resource, it opens a ARM, which allows you to create a resource, delete a resource, or update a resource. It is a centralized way to manage infra through declarative templates and manage resources as a group. So you could be doing that for the entire group, not for an individual, not just restricted to an individual resource. It could be for individual, it could be for an entire group. With ARM templates, user can describe the resource they want to use in a declarative JSON format and ensure repeatable results. Please pay attention. Again, a question I just remembered. I was helping a student prepare for AZ-900, and they told me that they had a similar question on ARM. When you want to create a resource on Azure, rather than going and doing it in the portal, you could create a JSON format which has information like create, compute, and size B1S, and networking this, firewall this, port this, so on, blah, blah, blah. So that is a template. That is a Azure Resource Manager template. You pass in that template, it's going to create a similar resource each and every time you pass the same thing to it. So this is more of like infrastructure as code. You have written the code, you're using that code to create infra as per your requirement. It's just that you are doing it manually over here. In IAC, you could automate it, but your JSON is getting converted into infrastructure. This is the template which has information about what resource needs to be deployed, how many resources need to be deployed, what should be the size of the resource, what should be the capability of the resource, what should be the firewall status of the resource. Does this make sense to all of you? Give me a thumbs up. It is very, very important. All you need to know is when you talk about Azure Resource Manager, you need to remember it is a way of writing in some JSON code, which could be used to create the same virtual machine again and again whenever you give the same code. So for example, let's say if Ankit is sitting in the New York office and Khalid is sitting in the Ottawa office, and then Jatin is in Toronto, and I have written some code and I want everyone to have identical machines. We could share that code amongst each other. We all could be giving this code to Azure Resource Manager. This code will contain information like what size of resource, how many resource, what specifications, and Azure is going to build an infrastructure taking that template as a baseline. It's like, okay, this is what you have. I'm going to use this and I'm going to create something for you. Okay, ACAM, why not? So Resource Manager is, you go to Azure account, you, instead of typing and selecting the options, you have the option selected in JSON. So someone has already written the code, which includes information like this is the instance that needs to be created, this is the size of the instance, this is the cores of the instance, this is the networking, this is the port. So it's a JSON file containing key value pairs about what needs to be created. Rather than you going and clicking and selecting all the options, you pass in the file and it is going to take all the inputs from the file and it's going to create an instance as per your requirements. The advantage is, let's say you might get confused, you might hit a wrong button, but every time you pass in the same file, it will not get confused. It will create the exact same configuration. So rather than performing the steps, you can note down the steps in a JSON file within a specific format, which they have. Again, that's not a part of the workshop because that's beyond the content. But yeah, you can create it. You can create a JSON file, and that could be used as a template to create a similar instance again and again whenever required. Does that answer your question, AKM? Yes, Ankit, go ahead.
Earlier we had the concept, like we are still learning about it, like management groups. So basically, like so each and every layer of these management groups, or each and every layer in the hierarchy of the organization, they'll have different levels of how do you say, like access through ARM. So like each and every level, like hierarchical level, can use ARM, but to a different extent.
Yeah. So management groups is when you logically divide the resources depending, at a broader scale.
Yeah.
So it's just putting the resources together depending upon the policies that you set, depending upon the budgets that you set. They might not all be able to run the same, the same JSON. But if you are allowed to perform an action, let's say considering you're a part of the group which is allowed to perform that action, rather than doing it on your own, you could be doing that via writing a JSON file. So let's say if Ankit is authorized for a so and so level of machine, you'll not be authorized for something higher. If you give a
Yeah.
command for something higher, it's going to come back as an error. Rather than you going and doing it manually, that work is now replaced by passing the JSON template, which is automatically going to pick your intentions, and it is going to convert that into the infrastructure for you.
Okay.
Your roles, responsibilities, your logs, everything will automatically kick in. But it is just a way for removing the manual clicks to make an account, converting it with a JSON. So you pass it and it does everything for you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Last few slides, Azure Advisor. So Azure Advisor is a service that provides recommendations to improve the reliability, security, performance, operational intelligence, and cost of your resources. So it'll give you information. Hey, you're under provision. Please go, use more resources. Hey, you have more resources. Save on your cost. Hey, your ports are open. Please add your security. So Advisor is a service that advises you on how you're working with Azure. It has basically few categories. First is reliability, security, performance, operational intelligence, and cost. So it's going to tell you how you're doing in terms of cost. Can you save, or are you spending very much? It's going to tell you how well are you operating. It's going to tell you what is your performance, how much are you using your resources, how secure is your environment, and if something goes down, how reliable are you, if you have resilience or not. So pretty straightforward stuff. Last two slides, and this is the easiest concept, but still asked a few times in the exam. Infrequent, but yeah, it is asked. Azure Service Health. For example, at times a service might not be performing well in one particular region, whereas it might be it might be performing well in the other. It could be your factor, it could be Azure's factor. You could be using Service Health to see, hey, what is the health of the service that we are consuming. Going on with the official definition, it says Azure Service Health is a combination of 3 Azure services that help you keep track of your resources and overall status of Azure. So it is basically a combinational service. What it uses in the background is it provides you a global health of all the services across all the regions. For example, if S3, okay, not S3, I got confused with Azure, AWS. Let's say if your file service is experiencing issues in the US East region or in the US West region, it can notify you about that. So it's going to create notifications. You can just go to this one service and it's going to tell you what is the status. Okay, so it provides a global view of the health of all Azure services across all Azure regions. So Service Health provides a narrowed down view of Azure services and regions that you are using. So it's restricted to what you are using, while Resource Health provides information about the health of your individual resource. Azure Service Health gives you a complete view of your Azure environment, and historical alerts are stored and accessible for later review. In case of any issues, Azure Service Health also provides link to support. So for example, depending upon what support plan you are on with Microsoft, depending upon if you are an organization customer, an elite customer, platinum customer, or just a regular user, you'll be in one of the plans. And again, I'll send you a couple more resources by the end of the day, or maybe tomorrow, where you can look at those resources. So when you go through them, they have information on what plans Azure offers. And the higher the plan you are in, the more, the premium service you'll be getting in case something goes wrong. So this Service Health is going to tell you how this resource is performing across regions, how it is performing across your region. It is going to tell you how your environment is and how your resources. So basically, just by looking at Service Health, you'll know if your device is failing. Is it just your device? Is it just your resource? Is it just your database? Is it just your virtual machine? Or if it is happening globally at a service level, and at what region? And then is the Azure Monitor, which collects and analyzes all the data on Azure on-premise and multi-cloud. It gives you a central repository and provides real-time and historical performance views. So you get reports that, hey, you have a uptime of so and so minutes, you have a downtime of so and so minutes across the month. This is where you had a surge, and we had a denial of service because there were more requests than you can handle. This is where you were using 20% of your resources where you should have used 80%. So it's going to give you all the analytics which you can look into, you can analyze, and then this is all historical data as well. So you can go back in time, you can see how it was performing yesterday, how it was performing day before yesterday. You are going to get some log analytics where you can see how the performance has been, and response time, failure rate, request rate, how many requests were there, how long did it take for us to give back the response for the request, and what time it took, is all covered in the Azure Monitor. With this being said, we have covered all the content for AZ-900 by this time. It's been a long journey, but all of you have sticked around till the end. So thank you so much for that. I'm aware of the fact many people have part times on weekends, and hence many people are not here. By now, they'll be accessing the. They've asked me for the recordings. You'll all get recordings for this. All the very best for your certification. This content has been shared with you. It will be shared again. We are here to discuss the questions. I'm going to stop the recording, and I'm going to start discussing some questions that have been custom built for you so that you get